Hello everyone, this is Carter Wetzel here with a long form video covering how silk maintains its peg. Now, for those of you who don't know, silk is an over-collateralized stablecoin. This means it has more collateral backing it than the amount of silk at large and in terms of how much that silk is worth. So, people are able to borrow silk against things like Bitcoin, things like Atom, things like Tether, and then using a series of stability mechanisms, silk is actually tracking a set of assets. It's tracking the Canadian dollar, the US dollar, the Bitcoin, the yen, euro, and gold. And via these stability mechanisms that I'll talk about today, you'll be able to understand how silk is able to track this dynamic basket, and how silk is able to guarantee its over collateralization. Now, that silk basket, just to kind of get familiar with silk, is split up with different weights across these different assets. So 7.6% of silk's peg is tracking the Canadian dollar, 34% to the US dollar, 10% to the yen, 5 to 6% to Bitcoin, 23% to euro, and roughly 18% to gold. And you can see here over time that as these assets are appreciating and depreciating in value against the dollar, you can see silk's peg kind of slowly tracking those price movements over time, creating this really interesting inflation and volatility hedge. If you're someone holding the euro, you can hold silk, and you have kind of this diversified exposure to all these different pieces of the puzzle. And if you're someone who wants to avoid just holding the US dollar and all the risks that come with that, silk is this really interesting stablecoin. So earlier on, we talked about this concept of this over-collateralized backing, and you can borrow silk against those assets. That's how silk is introduced into circulation. And this process of locking up collateral and minting out silk is essentially what we call a vault. And I'm going to walk us through how a vault works. So you can see here in the upper left-hand corner, we have our assets. So assume a user comes in and they lock up $150 worth of Bitcoin. They now have the ability to borrow silk against their assets. Now, assume that silk is currently at $1.05 peg, and let's say our user borrows 47.6 silk. If you look at the balance sheet over here, you can see that there's $150 worth of assets and $50 worth of debt, right? Every silk in circulation represents essentially a debt that has to be fulfilled. There has to be enough assets to back the debt that has been issued. And you can see there's more assets than debt. This ratio over here actually is if you take $150 worth of Bitcoin divided by the $50 worth of silk, there's actually a 300% collateralization per silk. So essentially there's $3 worth of assets per $1 worth of debt. It's really strong guarantees. That's awesome. That's really good solvency. And you can see here that this individual's position currently has what is known as a loan-to-value ratio. So there's a 33% loan-to-value ratio. And the way these vaults work, in order to maintain the promise of stability and over-collateralization, if the user's debt increases in value against the assets, or if the assets decrease in value against the debt that's been issued, and they go above a certain threshold, a set of liquidations are performed, where essentially assets are given to the market in return for silk, and then the silk is burned. And if that sounds confusing, it kind of is confusing, and I'll explain that a couple slides from now. But regardless, this user has a 33% loan-to-value ratio with the silk that they borrowed, and if 80% LTV is when liquidations occur, this user is quite safe, right? It's going to take them either borrowing more silk or the value of their assets dropping in order to start to enter into kind of this danger zone, and we'll walk through what that looks like. So now assume our user borrows 20 more silk. You're absolutely allowed to do this. You're allowed to continue to borrow more against your assets. The risk here now is that the value of the debt went up, and so their loan to value ratio is getting closer to that 80% liquidation mark. You'll notice down here too that their collateralization went from 300% to 211%. So that's starting to drop now, and the system keeps track of this. It's automatically making sure, all right, is our user entering into a point where the system-wide collateralization could be, in jeopardy. So let's walk through this scenario now. Assume the price of Bitcoin decreases. What can end up triggering when this ends up going above the minimum liquidation point, a liquidation is triggered. And what a liquidation is, it's the process of forcibly using escrowed assets on the smart contract to pay off debt to ensure the system-wide collateralization of Silk is maintained. So assume that the price of Bitcoin dropped, and now all of your Bitcoin that you locked up that was originally worth $150 is now only worth $77, right? That your debt stayed the same, but the value of the asset backing dropped. And so this is what ends up happening. You'll see here that their current LTV, if you take the debt, the value of the debt divided by the value of the assets, that they currently have a 90% LTV. And you'll notice down here that Silk is only 110% collateralized. So right now our system's like, ooh, it's time for liquidation. We got to maintain that promise of at least 100% backing. And so we're going to trigger a liquidation because the LTV of this position is above that liquidation price point. So we got to maintain solvency. And so this is how the system performs a liquidation. There is something called the Silk stability pool. And the way the Silk stability pool works is people are able to deposit Silk into this pool, and in the event of a liquidation, the Silk from the stability pool is sent to the protocol and it burns the Silk, and in return for the stability pool giving up their Silk, they receive the liquidated position. And so the concept here is, the borrower, they're holding on to Silk in their wallet and they got liquidated. There's no way to force that user to give the Silk back to pay off their debt. And so the way we solve that is by essentially having a liquidation mechanism. You have an economic lever where other participants are able to account for that user's debt by saying, all right, I'll turn my Silk in, I'll pay off that user's debt, and in return, I get that user's assets, and I get them at a discount. Therefore, I'm walking away with profit. If I'm turning in $50 worth of Silk and I'm getting $75 worth of Bitcoin, I'm maintaining the system-wide solvency for everyone, and I'm walking away with a profit. And ultimately, it's the person who borrowed, it's the person who liquidated that is losing out on money in the system, and that's by design. That's good mechanism design. We want to punish the person who's getting liquidated, and we want to positively, encourage and enforce and give value to the people that are helping maintain the stability, and that is what the stability pool is the liquidated position. They send their Bitcoin to the stability pool sends their Silk to the burn contract, and now the amount of Silk, the amount of debt in the system is reduced, and the way that debt is reduced is the stability pool wants that Bitcoin. They want those liquidated assets. And just to kind of like walk through, who owns what. So at the start, let's say there was 10 Silk. What exactly is locked in the smart contract? You had the Bitcoin that was locked into the vault by the borrower, and then you also have the stability pool folks, right? They had their Silk in a smart contract waiting to handle any form of liquidations. And then there was this other Silk down here in the pink. This is Silk that was borrowed against that Bitcoin vault. But you'll notice that the yellow box is not around this Silk, because when you borrow Silk, it goes to your wallet and you have full control over it. That's not sitting on a smart contract. You have complete control over it, even during a liquidation. It's not just like forcibly pulled out of your wallet. It's the stuff on the smart contracts that help maintain the solvency of the system. So during the liquidation, what happens is all of that stability pool Silk right here on the smart contract, it goes ahead and it gets burned, and then the pink outlined Bitcoin is sent to the stability pool, that green outline, right? They're turning in their silk, it's getting burned, and then they're earning that Bitcoin in return. And then throughout the entirety of it, the borrower who got liquidated, they still maintain control of the debt that they issued against their assets. Now, we covered what happens when the value of the assets in the vault decrease. So now we're going to talk about a scenario where what happens if, Silk has this dynamic peg, and this is its most unique feature besides its privacy. What happens if Silk actually appreciates in value against the dollar? What happens to a vault if Silk's value increases? And essentially what's happening here is, so $150 worth of debt, you borrow 100 Silk, here's, we have 70% LTV, everything is safe, everything is healthy, 142% collateralization. This is a solvent position. Now, what happens if Silk's peg goes from $1.05 to $1.21? Now, I'll say this, Silk is intentionally designed to not have this level of volatility, but to just kind of exacerbate and talk about the effect of Silk appreciating within the context of a loan position, let's assume Silk's peg drastically appreciates. What actually ends up happening on the balance sheet is the value of the debt that you took out increased in value. So Silk became more valuable, but actually what the problem is that the system's I have to account for the value of the debt increasing. So this actually puts the individual's vault position under strain. And so you'll see that their LTV actually went from that 70% LTV all the way up to 81%. And so because their debt appreciated in value, even though and their assets stayed the same, this actually is going to trigger a liquidation, right? So that's this vault would get liquidated. And so to kind of walk through it, if Silk goes from $1.05 to $1.20, what happens is that a vault's LTV is gonna be put in a more dangerous situation, and so there's actually more liquidations when the value of the debt, when the value of Silk appreciates in value over time. And so the inverse is also true. If Silk's peg decreases, vault positions actually become healthier. They're actually in a better spot, and so there's actually less liquidations. And this is, of course, assuming that the assets backing the vaults have no volatility. This is just in a vacuum. Silk price goes up, there's more liquidations. Silk price goes down, there's less liquidations. So we've covered how liquidations are triggered. We understand that every Silk represents a debt, and there's something called the stability pool. And the stability pool does exactly what it says. It helps remove Silk off the market. It burns that debt at large, and in return, they receive the assets that were escrowed on the smart contract. So what happens if Silk market price is less than the target peg? Now we're going to talk about peg stability. Before we were talking about solvency. This is specifically if Silk is supposed to be at $1.05, how do we maintain that promise? What happens if it goes to $1.04 when the peg is supposed to be at $1.05? How do these mechanisms work? So essentially, if Silk is below, if the market price is less than the target peg, there are arbitrage opportunities that emerge. So $1.05 right here is our target peg, and let's say the market price is $1. So Silk is under peg on the market by 5 cents compared to where we want it to be. What a user can do is they can essentially come in, and they, with their $150, let's say they took a loan of 100 Silk against their $150 worth of Bitcoin. What they have the opportunity to do is they can come in on the market and purchase 100 Silk at the $1 market price with $100 worth of assets. So this is important. They owe the vault 100 Silk, which according to the smart contract is worth $105. But they have the opportunity to go on the market and purchase Silk as if it's worth only $1. And so what this means is that they get to the arbitrage that occurs is people buy back Silk at a discount compared to what the smart contract is expecting, and they can pay off their loan with Silk at a discount. So the smart contract is treating each Silk as if it's worth $1.05. The market was treating it like it's $1, and so that person who comes in, when they buy the Silk, they're on the supply and demand curve. They're pushing the demand curve to the right, and so they're actually on the open market help push silk back to its target peg in the process of buying back the discounted silk so they can turn it back into the vault to pay off their debt at a discount. And this is like a profitable arbitrage. So to like really simplify it, as a user, I can pay back $105 worth of smart contract debt using $100 of silk acquired off of the open market. And so in summary, when silk is under peg, the mechanism that brings it back to target peg is an arbitrage opportunity where people can pay off their debt at a discount. So what happens if silk market price is greater than the target peg? So for let's say target peg is $105 and the market price of silk is $1.10. So the arbitrage here is that you can lock up $150 worth of Bitcoin, and then you can mint out silk as if it's only worth $1.05 each, right? So I mint out my 100 silk. I borrowed 100 silk at the $1.05 peg rate. I can then go around to the market and sell 100 silk at the $1.10 market rate. So you're able to, you're essentially you're expanding the supply for everyone, and you're able to sell silk, which increases the supply on the market, which is what pushes the price back to the target peg. And so the arbitrage is that when silk is over peg, it gives borrowers a chance to sell their borrowed silk at a market rate greater than the smart contract rate, and essentially they lock in the profits. They minted out 100 silk, sold it for $110 when their debt position is only worth $105 on the smart contract. So between those two mechanisms of buying discounted debt or selling silk at a premium, those are the two mechanisms that ensure that silk is tracking its target peg. Anyways, everyone, that is the presentation. I hope this video gave you a better idea of how silk maintains its peg, how it maintains its solvency. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments below. Happy to answer any economic questions, any mechanism design questions, and hope you guys have a wonderful day.